Søren Kierkegaard's use of pseudonyms is often treated as an eccentric literary choice or an attempt to obscure his true views. In reality, it is neither. The pseudonyms are not a disguise. They are a philosophical method, one rooted in Kierkegaard's conviction that direct communication fails when the truth concerns existence. Kierkegaard believed that the most important truths are not informational. They are not facts to be learned or propositions to be agreed with. They are truths that place a demand on how a person lives. And when truth makes such a demand, explaining it directly becomes counterproductive. The problem is not misunderstanding. The problem is understanding without consequence. A person can understand ethics without becoming ethical. They can understand faith without believing. They can understand despair without ever confronting their own despair. In each case, understanding becomes a substitute for transformation. Kierkegaard saw this as the defining sickness of modern culture. His contemporaries were educated, articulate, and intellectually sophisticated. They knew enormous amounts about morality and religion. Yet Kierkegaard believed they lived evasively, postponing commitment while mistaking reflection for depth. Reflection in this sense becomes a shield. One reflects on life instead of living it. One analyses beliefs instead of standing behind them. One explains one's condition instead of acting. Reflection multiplies perspectives, but it weakens decision. It creates distance where responsibility is required. Kierkegaard believed that philosophy, theology, and even preaching had become complicit in this evasion. By explaining truth clearly and persuasively, they allowed individuals to admire it without being changed by it. This is why Kierkegaard refused to write as a conventional philosopher. If he had presented his conclusions directly, readers would have been tempted to agree intellectually and move on unchanged. They could say, "Yes, that is correct," without asking whether it applied to their own lives. Agreement is cheap, existence is not. Kierkegaard therefore set himself a different task. He did not want to convince readers of propositions. He wanted to force them into a position where they had to relate to what was being said personally. This required a radical break with direct communication. Direct communication tells the reader what is true. Indirect communication places the reader in a situation where truth becomes unavoidable, not because it is asserted, but because it must be confronted. The pseudonyms make this possible. By speaking through voices that are not his own, Kierkegaard removes the authority of the author. There is no single voice to submit to, no final position to adopt safely. Each pseudonym speaks from within a way of existing, exposing its logic, its strengths, and its limitations. The reader is not told which voice is right. The reader must choose how to respond. This choice cannot be made abstractly. It implicates the reader's own life, values, and commitments. The pseudonyms therefore function as mirrors rather than instructors. They reflect back the reader's own posture toward existence. This is why Kierkegaard believed indirect communication was ethically necessary. If truth demands transformation, then the method of communication must preserve the individual's responsibility. Any method that makes truth easy, comforting, or immediately adoptable undermines that responsibility. Kierkegaard would rather be misunderstood than make existence safe. That willingness to risk misunderstanding lies at the heart of his pseudonymous authorship. Kierkegaard's refusal to write everything under his own name is inseparable from his rejection of authority as a shortcut to truth. He believed that when an author speaks with recognized authority, the reader's responsibility weakens. The authority absorbs the burden of decision. One can agree, admire, or dissent without ever being personally implicated. For Kierkegaard, this was fatal to existential truth. Authority encourages a dangerous posture. If this great thinker says it, then it must be true. In that posture, the reader becomes a spectator rather than a participant. Belief becomes imitation. Commitment becomes assent. Responsibility quietly disappears. Kierkegaard saw this dynamic everywhere in Christianity. People believed the doctrines, they knew the theology, they belonged to the church. And yet, Kierkegaard believed they had never confronted what Christian faith demands of a single individual. Faith had been converted into knowledge and membership, both of which allow one to remain unchanged. Authority made this possible. If Christianity could be explained, systematized, and defended by experts, then ordinary believers could rely on those explanations rather than confronting the demand of faith themselves. Kierkegaard believed this turned Christianity into something comfortable, reasonable, and socially reinforced, precisely the opposite of what it was meant to be. By refusing to write authoritatively, Kierkegaard blocks this escape. The pseudonyms deny the reader a figure to follow. There is no master voice to appeal to, no final interpretation to adopt. Each voice speaks convincingly, but none claim ultimate authority. The reader cannot outsource responsibility to the author because the author has withdrawn. This withdrawal is deliberate. Kierkegaard believed that truth which matters existentially cannot be handed down. It must be appropriated. Appropriation means that the individual must take the truth into their own life, allowing it to shape decisions, commitments, and self-understanding. No authority can do this on another's behalf. If Kierkegaard had written, "This is how you must live," he would have undermined his own aim. Readers would have judged the claim rather than themselves. They would have debated correctness instead of confronting responsibility. The pseudonyms reverse this dynamic. Each pseudonym presents a coherent perspective, intelligent, persuasive, and internally consistent. The reader may find themselves agreeing strongly, but agreement has consequences. Agreement reveals where the reader stands, what they value, and what they avoid. In this way, the pseudonyms expose the reader. Kierkegaard wanted readers to experience themselves responding, feeling attraction, resistance, discomfort, or relief. These reactions matter more than conclusions. They reveal where inwardness is present and where it is absent. This is why Kierkegaard often refuses to clarify his own position, even when pressed. Readers frequently ask, which pseudonym represents Kierkegaard's true view? Kierkegaard believed this question misunderstood the project entirely. If he answered it, the reader would be relieved of the burden he was trying to impose. There is no safe Kierkegaard to follow. The task is not to identify his position, but to recognize your own. By refusing authority, Kierkegaard places the weight of existence back where it belongs, on the individual who must live without guarantees. This refusal is not arrogance or obscurity. It is ethical seriousness. Kierkegaard's pseudonyms are not aliases for a single hidden viewpoint. They are ways of existing, lived perspectives that reveal themselves from within rather than being judged from above. Each pseudonym speaks coherently, intelligently, and persuasively, precisely because Kierkegaard inhabits each position fully. This is what makes the method unsettling. The pseudonyms are not straw men. They are not caricatures designed to be defeated. Each voice articulates a genuine possibility of human existence, complete with its own logic, values, and internal tensions. The reader is not guided toward a conclusion. They are left to recognize themselves in what is being said. Some pseudonyms speak aesthetically. These voices are concerned with immediacy, pleasure, mood, irony, and avoidance of commitment. Life is treated as something to be experienced rather than chosen. Decisions are postponed in favor of possibility. Commitment is seen as limitation. Irony becomes protection. Kierkegaard does not mock this posture. He understands its appeal. The aesthetic life is seductive because it avoids responsibility while maintaining intensity. One can feel deeply without being bound. One can engage without committing. One can remain open indefinitely, but this openness has a cost. The aesthetic life fragments the self. Without commitment, there is no continuity. Without continuity, there is no self to stand behind actions. The aesthetic individual drifts, constantly reacting, rarely choosing. Kierkegaard allows this posture to reveal its own emptiness without condemning it. Other pseudonyms speak ethically. Here, life is structured by responsibility, duty, and universality. The ethical individual chooses themselves through commitment. They accept limitation, continuity, and accountability. They understand themselves as answerable to others and to themselves. This voice is serious, dignified, and compelling. Yet Kierkegaard again refuses to resolve the matter. The ethical life, while superior to the aesthetic, still encounters limits. Duty can become rigid. Universality can flatten individuality. One can live ethically and still avoid the deepest demands of existence. The ethical life does not eliminate despair. It reorganizes it. Still, other pseudonyms speak religiously. These voices confront paradox, offense, and risk. They speak of faith not as doctrine, but as an existential leap, a commitment made without rational guarantees. Here, the individual stands alone, not before society, but before God. This is the most demanding posture Kierkegaard presents. And again, he does not simplify it. Faith is not presented as comfort. It is not presented as certainty. It is presented as risk, a decision that cannot be justified in advance. The religious life intensifies responsibility rather than dissolving it. Crucially, Kierkegaard does not arrange these perspectives into a neat progression. There is no staircase from aesthetic to ethical to religious that one simply climbs. Individuals can move between these postures, resist them, or misunderstand them. The transitions are not logical, they are existential. This refusal to systematize is deliberate. If Kierkegaard presented a clear hierarchy, readers would attempt to locate themselves on it and feel secure. By refusing clarity, Kierkegaard preserves the demand of choice. One must decide not only how to live, but whether one is willing to live with the consequences of that decision. The pseudonyms therefore function as existential experiments. They do not teach doctrines, they stage possibilities. They expose how each way of existing both sustains and undermines itself. The reader cannot remain neutral. Neutrality itself becomes a posture, one that Kierkegaard treats with suspicion. This is why Kierkegaard's pseudonymous authorship is so exhausting. It denies resolution, it denies reassurance, it denies the reader the pleasure of correct interpretation. Instead, it demands self-recognition. Where do you linger? Which voice feels familiar? Which one unsettles you, and why? Kierkegaard believed that these questions mattered more than any conclusion. Kierkegaard's refusal to resolve the contradictions between his pseudonymous voices is not a failure of philosophy. It is the point of the philosophy. Where other thinkers aim to eliminate contradiction through synthesis, Kierkegaard preserves it deliberately, because contradiction mirrors the structure of existence itself. Existence, Kierkegaard insists, is not coherent in the way systems demand. A human being can desire incompatible things, hold conflicting values, and experience tension without resolution. To eliminate these tensions conceptually is to falsify life. Kierkegaard believed that systems which promise reconciliation often do so by flattening the individual. Hegelian philosophy offered such reconciliation. In the system, contradictions are aufgehoben, lifted up and resolved within a higher unity. From the standpoint of the whole, conflict dissolves. Kierkegaard saw this as an intellectual triumph and an existential disaster. The system makes sense of everything, but no one lives at the level of the whole. Individuals live in tension. They experience anxiety, doubt, temptation, obligation, and despair not as theoretical problems but as lived realities. To resolve these tensions abstractly is to evade them. Kierkegaard therefore insists that contradiction must be endured rather than explained away. This is why his pseudonyms never converge. Each voice articulates a coherent way of existing, but no voice is permitted to become final. If Kierkegaard resolved the contradictions, readers could adopt the resolution instead of confronting the tension themselves. The work would collapse into doctrine. Kierkegaard refuses this collapse. Contradiction forces decision. When perspectives cannot be reconciled intellectually, the reader must decide existentially. One must choose how to live rather than which argument to accept. Kierkegaard believed that this shift from explanation to decision was essential. The desire for resolution, he argues, is often a desire for relief. Resolution promises rest. It promises that the work is finished, that responsibility has been discharged, that uncertainty has been overcome. Kierkegaard distrusted this desire. He believed that much of philosophy catered to it, offering comfort disguised as understanding. By contrast, Kierkegaard's work refuses to let the reader rest. The contradictions persist, the tensions remain. The reader is left alone with the demand of existence. There is no final voice to appeal to, no authoritative synthesis to adopt. This refusal is ethically motivated. Kierkegaard believed that resolving contradictions on behalf of the reader would amount to taking responsibility away from them. Existence would be reduced to a puzzle with an answer rather than a task with consequences. The pseudonyms, therefore, create a space in which the reader must confront themselves, not abstractly, not theoretically, but inwardly. This inward confrontation is unsettling. It reveals how much one longs for certainty, how quickly one reaches for explanation instead of decision. Kierkegaard wanted the reader to notice this reflex, to see how the demand for resolution can become a way of avoiding existence. In this sense, Kierkegaard's refusal to resolve contradictions is not obscurantism, it is honesty. Existence does not resolve itself neatly. Choices do not come with guarantees. Faith does not eliminate doubt. Responsibility does not eliminate anxiety. To pretend otherwise is to replace life with theory. Kierkegaard's pseudonymous authorship preserves this truth by refusing closure. The work remains open because existence remains open. The reader is not given answers because the question is not theoretical. It is existential. For Kierkegaard, indirect communication is not merely a stylistic preference. It is an ethical necessity. The way a truth is communicated must correspond to the kind of responsibility that truth demands. If a truth concerns how one exists, then communicating it in a way that removes responsibility is itself unethical. This is the final and decisive reason Kierkegaard writes under pseudonyms. Direct communication, he believed, tempts the reader into passivity. When a truth is stated clearly, defended rigorously, and delivered authoritatively, the reader is invited to evaluate it rather than live it. They can admire the argument, critique it, or agree with it, all without allowing it to touch their existence. Indirect communication blocks this escape. By refusing to speak in his own authoritative voice, Kierkegaard prevents the reader from hiding behind agreement. There is no doctrine to accept, no conclusion to repeat, no final position to adopt safely. Instead, the reader encounters possibilities of existence and must decide how to relate to them. This decision cannot be outsourced. Kierkegaard believed that the greatest danger facing modern individuals was not false belief, but self-deception. The belief that one is living authentically simply because one understands authentic ideas. Indirect communication is designed to expose this deception. When a reader becomes frustrated, confused, or impatient with Kierkegaard, those reactions are not obstacles. They are data. They reveal the reader's desire for certainty, clarity, and resolution, and often their resistance to responsibility. Kierkegaard wanted the reader to notice these reactions. Why do you want the author to speak plainly? Why do you demand a final answer? Why does ambiguity feel like failure? For Kierkegaard, these questions cut closer to existence than any conclusion ever could. Indirect communication also preserves freedom. If Kierkegaard told the reader how to live, he would be taking responsibility away from them. He would be replacing freedom with instruction. By refusing to do this, he ensures that whatever choice the reader makes is genuinely their own. This is why Kierkegaard accepts misunderstanding as a necessary cost. Many readers will miss the point. Some will dismiss him as obscure or contradictory. Others will attempt to systematize him anyway. Kierkegaard believed this was unavoidable. A work that demands inward appropriation cannot guarantee correct reception. But a work that guarantees correct reception is no longer demanding. Kierkegaard would rather be misunderstood than become harmless. This ethical seriousness explains why his pseudonymous authorship continues to resist easy interpretation. The work refuses to settle. It refuses to become a doctrine. It remains unfinished in the only sense that matters. It leaves the task with the reader. Indirect communication, then, is Kierkegaard's final safeguard against evasion. It ensures that truth does not become information, that faith does not become doctrine, and that existence does not become theory. It preserves the tension between understanding and living, forcing the reader to confront the gap between the two. This is why Kierkegaard's pseudonyms are not an obstacle to understanding his work. They are the work. And once this method is understood, everything that follows in Kierkegaard's philosophy becomes clearer, not because the ideas are simpler, but because the demand they make is unmistakable. In the next video, we turn to one of Kierkegaard's most frequently misunderstood claims, that truth is subjective, not in the sense of opinion or relativism, but in the sense that truth becomes true only when it is lived. Without this idea, Kierkegaard collapses into abstraction. With it, his entire project comes into focus.